Like I say, I'm in different spots with my different classes, so can you guys just tell me what was the last bullet point we ended on? Perfect.
I can't read my hand.
That's bad.
So nice though. That's nice to see.
The color coding makes it so much easier to see. Sure. Now, let's kind of recap from where we left off yesterday, because today we're going to take a look at how really this Battle of Belleau Wood is going to be basically the last German push, their last opportunity. Now, before we kind of get back into this, I want to go back to where we really started yesterday, as the timing of this works out almost perfectly. The spring of 1917 is enormous for the war, because in March of 1917, the Russians drop out of the war. Now, is that good news for Germany?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. But in April of 1917, the Americans are on the way. Is that bad news for Germany?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. But it's going to take some time. The Americans are going to take a couple of months to actually arrive. Now, when the Americans get there, the Brits and the French are all too happy to see them. Even the French are going to say a little bit later, had the Americans not arrived, we probably had about 2 weeks left. We could have stayed in the war about 2 weeks, but after that, we couldn't have kept going anymore. Now, at Belleau Wood, we're going to see the Germans push really all their chips in the middle. Their last big attempt to end the war. Do they succeed?
No.
The Americans fill the line, and we push them back into their original trenches. Now, I want to kind of play this out. Who sort of wins this battle? Does anyone really win in advance?
No.
Not really. Is it the same thing we've seen for the past 4 years here? The Germans are pushed back into their trench, and we're in the same spot. So, there's something else that really ends the war here. What I want to talk about today is how Germany's going to have to surrender because they just can't keep going. Germany's dying from the inside. Now, I need to kind of point this out because I brought this up. This was a couple weeks ago now. The Brits are going to use something to strangle Germany. But even the Brits know this is not a short-term solution. This is a long-term objective. What do the Brits use to strangle Germany? What is yes, Ethan?
Blockade.
The blockade. Now again, even the Brits said it's gonna take a while, but we got time. So if we got time, it will eventually work. Now remember, the Brits are blockading Germany to keep ammunitions and supplies and food from coming in. Germany can't supply those things enough on her own, so as the war drags on, her situation gets worse. I want to point out just a couple things here. This right here is a German food line. People waiting in line with their ration cards to get a government-issued piece of food. By this point in the war, rations have been cut to 500 calories a day. Now, a normal kind of diet, you're going to probably have about 2,000 to 2,500. These people are eating about a quarter of what's a normal sort of diet. Remember, the military eats first, civilians eat second. Now, this picture right here kind of shows what desperate people are going to do. This, I know it's kind of hard to see. This is a dead horse on the streets of Berlin. German people are cutting off pieces of meat in this dead horse on the street to increase their caloric intake. This is what they've gotten to. Now, this is in 1917. By 1918, I think we've talked about this, but maybe not. They start eating the family dogs, and then they start eating the rats, and then they start eating each other. Cannibalism has come to Germany. Can they keep the war effort up if this is what's going on? Germany's dying from the inside. But in kind of a weird way of going about this, the German army, the men that are still in the trenches, are willing to keep fighting. They're willing to keep going. They've been told for years even before this, that the other side has got to be wobbling. Now, they're not wrong. They're right. The other empire is about to fall apart too. But the German high command says there's no way they can keep going. They can't sustain the kind of casualties that we've inflicted. They've got to be close. Just hang on a little bit longer. The German army's been hearing that for years, most likely. While that's taking place, they're still fighting. But at home, back in Germany, they've got real serious problems. Food shortages. People are starving to death. The German U-boaters are refusing to go to sea. They'd rather be shot by their commanders than get back in the U-boats. Now remember, we talked about how bad it is in the trenches. Remember how bad it is in the U-boats? Remember what average lifespan in a U-boat was? Remember what it was? About 13 days. You got 2 weeks. They're refusing to go to sea. You have mutiny on your hands and no one can stop it. We've also got soldiers and workers revolting. People who work in the factories are saying, I'm not going to work until the war's over. I'm not going to produce the tools that can keep it going. I refuse to go to work. Germany's breaking down. And Kaiser Wilhelm II, who's in charge of all this, he saw what happened to Tsar Nicholas II. He saw the communists rise up. Do you think he might be a little bit nervous if this is what's going on in his country too?
Yes.
Oh yeah. He gets so nervous, he advocates the throne. He leaves. There's a very much thrown together kind of German government who's in charge when he leaves, and that German government says, we can't keep doing this. Our society's about to fall apart. How are we going to keep a war going if the society breaks down? We have to surrender. We need a ceasefire. We need an armistice. Now, there's something I want to point out about this. Germany's breaking down at home. But the soldiers in the trenches are willing to keep going. They've been told, we're so close. Just hold on and we're going to win the war. Those soldiers in the trenches, they're suffering horrifically, but they're still willing to keep fighting because they can look at where they are. They're still in basically the original trenches from where this started. This was the battle line in 1914. This is the battle line in 1918. They haven't gone anywhere. They're still in France. They're still in Belgium. They control this. Now, if you just look at the map, who's winning this war?
Germany.
Germany is. They knocked out the Russians. They've invaded France. They're still in France. They're the ones that are really in the lead. And now you have these German commanders saying, it's all over. We have to surrender. What a lot of these German troops are going to start saying is, we didn't lose the war. The politicians did. We were stabbed in the back. We were betrayed. There must be a conspiracy against us. There might even be a worldwide Jewish conspiracy against us. As if there's someone in the trenches at this point who starts saying things like that. Who do you think I'm referring to?
That one.
Adolf Hitler is in the trenches when the war comes to an end. On November 11th, 1918, an armistice, a ceasefire is agreed to by both sides. Now, this armistice is agreed to, and they say it will go into effect on the 11th day of the 11th month at 11 a.m. Now, I ask you to remember very few dates. This is one you got to remember, because even today, we still celebrate what's known as Armistice Day. Now, we call it something a little bit different, so I just want to ask you, do you know, what holiday do we celebrate on November 11th every year? You know what, Andrew, know? It's Veterans Day. Now, it used to be Armistice Day. Now, for us, it's Veterans Day. On 11 a.m., on the 11th day of the 11th month, both sides agree the war will stop. Now, you kind of have to understand something about this, though, because this is where it gets even more bizarre. They agree to this time, but even the high command says, look, we don't know what's going to happen before 11 a.m. We're still at war when you wake up in the morning. At 11 a.m., we're not. So be ready. What both sides will do on daybreak of November 11th is prepare for a potential raid. Now, what would often happen is one side would try to take the other trench right at daybreak, and you'd have to repel the invasion. Now, they don't know what's going to happen. Both sides are thinking, I don't know, maybe they want one more last suicidal attack. Who knows? So at daybreak on the 11th, both sides are there, machine guns, top of the trench, waiting for the other side to do something. But no one wants to be the last person to die in a war that's already decided. There are French troops who write about there's still German snipers picking people off at 9 a.m. The war's going to end in 2 hours, and there's still troops dying. As the clock is ticking down, getting closer to 11, everyone has no idea what's going to take place. It finally hits 11 a.m., and what these men write about is you can hear both sides across no man's land celebrating that the war is over. They're screaming with joy. They made it. They survived the war. And at 11:01, this is on a French troop that says this. He writes about how he watched a German troop climb out of the trenches with a machine gun. Here, all the French say, I knew it. I knew this was going to happen. They're going to raid. This one German troop locks his machine gun, sprays it across the air, the entire clip, throws his gun down, salutes the French line, and walks home. This is how the war ends. The worst war in human history up to that point just kind of stops. At 11 a.m., we're not at war anymore. What a weird way for this to happen. Now, this is maybe a real big problem. Because when the war just stops, all these German troops that have been in the trenches in the West for years, they just climb out and just walk back to Germany. They're not taken prisoner. They're not taken in chains. They just walk back. They just go home. The war just stops. Now, I say this because it's going to be really important later on. Just kind of the optics of it, just the way it looks. Does it look like the Germans lost the war?
No.
They just go home. The war just stops. This is how it ends. Now that the war is over, we got to figure out how we move forward from this. You got to keep something in mind. This is the worst man-made disaster in the history of the world up to that point. And now we got to figure out what to do now that the war's over. For the first time in American history, a president will leave the United States and go off to Europe to negotiate the peace. Now, Woodrow Wilson, the American president that's going to negotiate the peace, you got to understand something about this guy. He's an intellectual. Before he was president, he was a professor at Yale. He's a very, very sharp guy. But he's also a dreamer. He's not very practical in how he goes about this. What he creates with this negotiation is what's called his 14-point plan.